We have not even to risk the adventure alone. For the heroes of all time have gone before us. The labyrinth is thoroughly known. We have only to follow the thread of the hero path. And where we had thought to find an abomination, we shall find a god. Where we had thought to slay another, we shall slay ourselves. Where we had thought to travel outward, we shall come to the center of our own existence. And where we had thought to be alone, we shall be with all the world.
The call to adventure is the first step of the hero's journey, where he is being enticed out of his ordinary world. Even before their journey begins, however, Joseph Campbell explains how every hero has already undergone a hero's journey at birth.
Everyone is a hero in his birth. He has undergone a tremendous transformation from a little, you might say, water creature living in a realm of the amniotic fluid and so forth. Then coming out, becoming an air-breathing mammal. It's an enormous transformation, and it is a heroic act, and it's a heroic act on the mother's part to bring it about.
In Man of Steel, Krypton is a metaphor for the realm of the amniotic fluid, a planet where people are literally created in the water world of the Genesis chamber. Kal-El's birth is the escape from that realm. On Earth, we meet Clark going from place to place, performing acts of heroism, on a journey to find something. He's hearing his call to adventure. Refusal of the call is the next step in our hero's journey. It is where the adventure is seen through the lens of all its negatives, its obstacles, its dangers. As we delve into Clark's childhood, we see his father's lessons taking shape. He contemplates his place in the world, suppresses his powers, and hides his true nature. It takes a psychological toll on him, but is vital in shaping him into the hero he will become. Subsequently, he values humanity to the degree where he will allow those who are less powerful to help him, even when he doesn't need it, a trait of his personality that is carried forward into his adult life. All this is the result of the repercussions of him using his abilities publicly when saving everyone on the school bus. Clark continues in life, refusing the call to adventure, a necessary refusal as he is not yet ready. But as Campbell explains, eventually the hero will undergo a psychological metamorphosis.
The child has to give up his childhood and become an adult, has to die, you might say, to its infantile personality and psyche, and come back as a self-responsible adult. It's a fundamental experience that everyone has to undergo. We're in our childhood for at least 14 years, and then to get out of that posture of dependency, psychological dependency, into one of psychological self-responsibility requires a death and resurrection. And that is the basic motif of the hero journey. Leaving one condition, finding the source of life to bring you forth in a richer or more mature or other condition.
A supernatural aid appears to our hero now he has consciously or unconsciously committed to his adventure. The projection of Jor-El's consciousness through Kryptonian science makes for the building blocks of a powerful mythological presentation, both to us as an audience and to Clark within the context of the story.
I would say that all of our sciences are the material that has to be mythologized. A mythology gives the psychological, inward import of the world of nature roundabout as understood today. And my God, I've been hearing recently about some of the things that the physicists and astronomers are finding out, and it is magical. You've got to translate these things. I mean, you've got, what is it, about, I think they've got hundreds and hundreds of galaxies. It's not difficult to turn that into a mystical inspiration.
The knowledge given to Clark about him and his Kryptonian heritage is everything he needs to overcome the obstacles that lay ahead. He is able to shed his psychological burdens and take steps into understanding his place in the world. Jor-El describes Krypton's structured society, it leading to the planet's downfall, and Cal being the embodiment of something new, the ideal of what if a child dreamed of becoming something other than what society had intended. It is a clear nod to Joseph Campbell's philosophy of follow your bliss.
How do you find the divine power in yourself? The word enthusiasm means filled with the God. What makes you enthusiastic? Follow it. That's been my advice to young people. Ask me, what shall I do? Follow your bliss. The bliss is the message of God to yourself. That's where your life is.
In giving Cal his suit, Jor gives him much more than a physical item typical of the monomyth. He gives him an ideal to strive towards, an ideal of hope for Earth's future.
The old man as the advisor, I've known some of those people. He gives him not only a physical instrument, but a psychological commitment and a psychological center.
The crossing of the first threshold is the point at which the hero leaves the known or ordinary world and enters the realm of the unknown.
The first stage in the hero adventure, when he starts off on adventure, is leaving the realm of light, which he controls and knows about, and moving toward the threshold. And it's at the threshold that the monster of the abyss comes to meet him.
Before he meets the monster of the abyss, our hero must pass the threshold guardian. While they are often represented in mythology as characters, Man of Steel gives us an internalized representation of the threshold guardian by way of Kal-El's ability to push beyond his known limitations. Though at first unsuccessful, he composes himself, draws energy from the sun, and launches himself beyond the boundaries of what he ever considered himself capable of. He has left the limited world he knew and entered the limitless domain of the spectacular.
Then you come to the end of the world. That place psychologically that no one has ever explored for you, that you have to do on your very own. This I call the threshold of adventure. Before that, you're in more or less mapped out territory. There are a number of typical crises representing this point. What emerges to confront you is the absolute danger of darkness. This will be represented in the form of an typical creature, a whale.
The belly of the whale represents the hero's final separation from his own world. At this juncture, Clark is pressured into descending into the abyss to confront the monster, General Zod. This will be his biggest psychological test to date. It's the descent into the dark. Jonah in the whale. I mean, that's a standard motif of going into the whale's belly and coming out again. The whale represents the personification, you might say,
of all that is in the unconscious. In reading these things psychologically, water is the unconscious. The creature in the water would be the dynamism of the unconscious, which is dangerous and powerful and has to be controlled by consciousness.
The descent requires that Clark submit to Zod, but also first to humanity, of whom he has little trust due to his life experiences. In contemplation with the priest, it emerges that if he takes the leap of faith into the abyss and trusts humanity, the people of Earth could be inspired and in turn live up to Clark's hopes. As Clark begins the descent and offers himself to mankind, he is reunited with Lois. The meeting with the goddess is the point in the hero's journey where he encounters the personification of his bliss, the boon of his earthly quest.
The union of pairs of opposites in male-female term. The hero marries the goddess. The symbology of pairs of opposites united, of temporal and eternal principles identified, is rendered in terms of the sexual polarity.
Having previously discovered Clark's true identity, by not giving him up and allowing him to come forward when he was ready, this meeting takes on a new dimension. Clark thanks Lois for believing in him, and while she says it didn't make much difference in the end, Clark lets her know that it mattered to him. As is common in mythology, the interest of our hero's love is on her own journey. Side by side, Lois and Clark continue their journeys into the belly of the whale, portrayed by the beautifully designed Kryptonian scout ship, itself resembling a whale.
In the whale's belly, the hero goes into the abyss alive.
Now in the abyss, Clark is confronted for the first time by General Zod, and as is typical at this stage, must overcome an initial obstacle.
The hero is cut to pieces and descends into the abyss to be resurrected.
Woman as the temptress is a step in the hero's journey where he is tempted to stray from his quest. As in Clark's case, this temptation need not be from a woman, as the woman is a metaphor for the physical or material temptations of life. Here, Zod attempts to make Clark sympathize with his and Krypton's plight by lying to him about Jor-El's motives for sending Clark to Earth with the as-yet-hidden Codex. He can save Krypton. In Christ and the Buddha, Campbell gives examples of this classic mythological motif.
Christ, now there's a perfectly good hero deed formula represented there. And he undergoes 3 temptations. The economic temptation, change the stones to bread. Next, let's go up to the top of Herod's temple and see you cast yourself down. And God will bear you up and you won't even be bruised or healed. And then we have the political temptation. He's taken to the top of a mountain and shown the nations of the world and says, you can come into control of all these if you'll bow to me. Those are the 3 temptations of Christ. The Buddha also undergoes 3 temptations. And one is that of lust, another is that of fear, and another is that of social duty, doing what you're told.
In the belly of the whale, while Clark submits to mankind, he does not yield to temptation from Zod. He overcomes this psychological test and has his final conversation with Jor-El before escaping the whale, where he is told he can save Lois and the world. And we get the Christ-like visual allegory as he departs through the sun door.
The cross, I've told you, is the symbol of the world. He goes through the cross, leaves the four dimensions behind him, goes through the sun door, just at the moment when the crash comes.
The road of trials is the first step in the initiation phase of the hero's journey. It is a series of tests that our hero must negotiate in order to undergo his transformation.
Trials and revelations are what it's all about. What all the myths have to deal with is transformation of consciousness. That you're thinking in this way, and you have now to think in that way.
The test our hero takes reflects the one he is ready for, and it is symbolic of his stage of growth that his first trial is to defend his small town. In the first of his trials, Clark must defend Smallville from the Kryptonian invaders. Clark is able to overcome them thanks to their unfamiliarity with Earth's environment. It is this ability to control his inner spirit and potential which aids him in his next trial, a larger world-scale test, reflecting his readiness for the next stage of his transformation.
The narrow blade of a razor is the narrow, difficult path. And the problem is, this is the real problem of the left-hand path of following your bliss. You're following the lead of your emotion and your vitality, but the head has to be there all the time. You're on a narrow ridge, and the danger is falling off. That is to say, letting too much of the torrent of energy come through and blow it. There is a kind of regular morphology and inevitable sequence of experiences if you start out to follow your adventure, the sense of potentialities and these opening out before you, and you have no idea how to achieve them. You start out into the dark, and then strange little helpmates come along, and then the sense of dangers. You always run into really deep perils, because no one has gone this way before. There's nothing right or wrong when you're on the path, but there is imprudent and prudent action, because you're beyond good and evil as soon as you step out of the society. But, you know, you can lose your life that way.
In Batman v Superman, Clark is faced with 3 more trials, all of which are formulated by Lex Luthor. The first of these plays on Clark's psychological difficulty in understanding his place in the world. It is what Clark has been battling with since childhood. It is his dragon, which he must ultimately slay. Atonement with the Father is the center point of the hero's journey. It is where the hero must confront the ultimate power in his life.
Now, this can be depicted as atonement, as it is in the biblical tradition where we are atoned with the Father, or as at-one-ment, when Christ says, I and the Father are one.
This requires an abandonment of the attachment to ego. which is reflected in Jonathan Kent's parable of the flood and the cake. Clark has to learn to live with the consequences of his heroics by leaning toward the good.
Wolfram begins his whole romance with a long verse to the point that black and white are the qualities of every act. Every act has both good and evil. What are you going to do living, since everything you do has two effects? He says, all we can do is lean toward the good.
The road of trials for our hero continues with a classical mythological motif, the brother battle. Manipulated into a fight to the death by Lex Luthor, Clark and Bruce are forced into combat. The brother battle need not be with a literal biological brother, but someone with whom our hero has an affinity. It symbolizes an aspect of our hero's persona with which he has inner struggles. In the case of Bruce, his mistrust of Clark epitomizes the mistrust the world has of him. If Clark can win this battle and gain Bruce's trust, he can eventually do the same with the world. The brother battle between Clark and Bruce parallels Percival's brother battle with Firefitz in Wolfram von Eschenbach's Grail Quest.
And as he goes riding away, there comes riding toward him out of the dark forest a pagan knight. The two knights ride at each other, unhorse each other, go at each other with swords, and Parzival's sword breaks on the helmet of the pagan knight. Pagan knight throws his own sword away and says, I don't fight a man without weapons, let's sit down. They sit down, they take off their helmets, the other knight is black and white, it's his brother.
The brotherhood between Bruce and Clark goes beyond their affinity for classic superhero acts. It is reinforced symbolically by their mothers sharing a name. They are both sons of Martha, but they are also both orphans. In saving Clark's mother, Bruce is able to slay his own dragon. In mythology, the hero trials often come in threes. In Man of Steel, they were the Battle of Smallville, the World Engine, and the Battle of Metropolis with Zod. In Batman v Superman, Clark's third trial is found in the battle against Doomsday. This is reflective of the classic mythological dragon battle, usually against a terrible alien monster. This will be our hero's final test. Apotheosis is the hero's moment of enlightenment and divine realization. From the Greek apo, from, and theos, God, apotheosis means to make a god of. The hero's journey is all about the transformation from one state into another, and it is in this moment that Clark is transformed into a god. As Clark saves Lois and observes the destruction caused by Doomsday, the message from his father becomes clear. He told Clark that the nightmares stopped because Martha gave him faith that there is good in this world, that she was his world. In telling Lois, "You are my world," Clark is actually saying there is good in this world, and that the nightmares and struggles that he has had to live and now die with are worth its salvation.
Apotheosis is where the hero realizes that he is the divine being himself. This is the way of the Buddha, who becomes the Buddha. He realizes, thou art that, I am that. That is full realization, symbolized in the high religions.
The ultimate boon is the achievement of a quest's goal, usually something that transcends a mere object. In Clark's death, he found that which had eluded him his whole life, his place in the world. Clark died and was buried so that Superman could become the symbol, to fulfill Jor-El's prophecy and become that ideal for humanity to strive towards. The synthesis of atonement with Jonathan Kent and fulfilling the prophecy of Jor-El follow classic mythological motifs of planting cultures.
When a figure is sacrificed in the planting culture, that figure is the god. The person who died, was buried, and became the food is Christ crucified, from whose body the food of the Spirit comes. There is a sublimation of what originally was a very solid vegetal image. He is on Holy Rood, the tree. He is himself the fruit of the tree. Jesus is the fruit of eternal life, which was on the second tree in the Garden of Eden. When man had eaten of the fruit of the first tree, the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he is said to have been expelled from the garden. So this tree of the non-duality is the tree of the exit. Now, the tree of coming back to the garden is the tree of immortal life, where you know that I and the Father are one. And this is exactly the tree under which the Buddha sits, the tree of the knowledge of immortal life. And the Buddha under his tree and Christ hanging on his tree are the same image. They are the same image. The one who has died to the flesh and been reborn in the spirit. This is an essential experience of any mystical realization. You die to your flesh and are born to your spirit. You identify yourself with the consciousness and life of which your body is but the vehicle. You die to the vehicle and become identified in your consciousness with that of which the vehicle is the carrier. And that is the God.
Rescue from without is one of the next possible steps in a hero's journey once the boon has been won. In mythology, the bliss of the infinite slumber is not easy to give up, and as is the case with Clark, the hero may require assistance from the ordinary world. This can be a large-scale event, such as Heracles rescuing Prometheus from the gods following his fire theft, which is a classic example of the magic flight, or a relatively small act like Gawain rescuing Percival from a love dream.
Well, it happens that the king's hawkers lose a hawk. It's a young hawk and it's a little frightened, and he senses a campfire somewhere, and he flies to that campfire. So there's Parsifal in the woods, and the hawk in the woods. Arthur's caught looking for both. That night, there's a light snow. Parsifal rides his horse in the morning, and the hawk follows him. And a whole flock of geese fly up, and the hawk goes at them and hits one of the geese and draws blood, and the blood drops on the snow. And when Parsifal sees that blood on the snow, 3 red drops on the pure white snow, he thinks of Contueramo's 2 white red cheeks and red lips on the white of her skin. And fascinated in the dream of Contueramo's, he stands there on his horse, looking at the snow. And this is when dawn comes in the camp of King Arthur. And one of the pages looks out, and he sees this knight on a horse there, gazing at the snow. And this youth rides out full tilt at the knight. Well, the knight's horse, he knows his business. When this knight is approaching, the horse turns to charge him, and the vision being broken, Parsifal comes to, holds his lance, boom, the young knight's on the ground, sprawling, and the horse turns back, and Parsifal's back looking at the snow. Then Gawain comes, without a weapon, and he sees the knight looking at the snow, and he says, what if it should be a love dream? So he just takes a light scarf and tosses it gently between the eyes and the vision. And Parsifal comes out and says, where is she? And Gawain tells him what has happened, calms him down, and says, you're invited to King Arthur's court.
This motif isn't just confined to the world of myth, but can also be found in the heroism of everyday life.
When I was in Hawaii some long 4 or 5 years ago, an extraordinary event took place. 2 policemen were driving up in their police car, and they saw on the other side of the white fence that guards the road a young man, obviously thinking about jumping. The policeman on the right got out and grabbed the man just as he jumped. The policeman did not let go. He was being pulled over. The second policeman ran around, caught him by the legs, and pulled him back. First one was asked, why didn't you let go? He said, I couldn't. That if I had let go of that man, I could not have lived another day of my life. I had given myself to him.
The rescue can either be successful with our hero returning, or as is the case of King Muchukunda, who wanted to remain in permanent repose in the special world, there could be a refusal of the return, and the disturbers could receive an ugly shock. The crossing of the return threshold is the moment in the hero's journey where he re-enters the ordinary world. And for the returning hero to complete his adventure, he must survive its impact. After being called upon by his rescuers, Clark is in a state of disorientation, not completely aware of who or where he is. It is at this point where Clark must decide if he will refuse the call of return like King Muchukunda, or find his center and return to the world.
The threshold of return is no joke. It is very often more difficult than the quest. Here you were following your allure of the unknown. You're going back to something that you had left behind. Until finally we get to the threshold again, back to the light world, and you're out.
Back in the light world, the ultimate task of the hero is to deliver the boon which was gained from the dark. In the case of Clark, to deliver a self-assured version of himself, to be that ideal of hope who finally knows his place in the world, and that the world recognizes as that beacon through his sacrifice. It is through this delivery we are finally able to understand a key component of myth, that the two worlds are actually one. Master of the two worlds is the point in the journey when the hero is able to pass between the inner and outer world without having to compromise the principles of either. In our hero's persona system, there's no longer a dichotomy between Clark Kent and Kal-El, between the man and the Superman.
I knew I'd found something when I started writing the hero. It's been a large experience, because that's what I was hoping for when I was writing. Namely, that I was giving people the key to the realm of the muses, which is where myth is. The seat of the soul is there where the inner and the outer worlds meet. The outer world is what you get in scholarship. The inner world is your response to it. And it's where these come together that we have the mythos. The outer world changes with historical time. The inner world is the world of anthropos. It is the world constant to the human race. And so you have throughout the mythological systems a constant. You always have the sense of recognizing something, and what you're recognizing is your own inward life, and at the same time the inflection through history.
He has freedom to be the hero, the ideal of hope, but also to live amongst us, as one of us. As he stated in his moment of self-annihilation, "This is my world," and he now has the freedom to live in it and to save it. For the realm of the gods is merely a forgotten dimension of the world we know, and the exploration of that dimension is the whole essence of the deed of the hero. The whole sense of the master of two worlds is perfectly encapsulated by the 8th century Hindu philosopher Adi Shankar. Sometimes a fool, sometimes a sage, sometimes possessed of regal splendor, sometimes wandering, sometimes as motionless as a python, sometimes wearing a benignant expression, sometimes honored, sometimes insulted, sometimes unknown. Thus lives the man of realization, ever happy with supreme bliss. Just as an actor is always a man whether he puts on the costume of his role or lays it aside, so is the perfect knower of the imperishable always the imperishable and nothing else. Freedom to live brings our hero's journey to its end. Once the hero has mastered the two worlds, it frees him from fear. This allows Clark to live in the moment, neither anticipating the future nor regretting the past. His focus being the enduring delivery of his elixir, his service to the planet, his bliss.
How can I get what I have to give to them? Not just what do they want. It involves compassion, not resentment, hostility, and violence. You can't give unless you're going to let the barrier drop that you had to put up to get away. all of the requirements are changed. In the return, here everything that they were was enough to drive you away. But if you're going to come back, you've got to see those things in kind of perspective. I call this the delivery of your elixir, and the symbology is of the awakened world. What do you have to do? That is the circle.
As Zack Snyder's mythical journey for Superman comes to an end, so too does ours. Joseph Campbell explains, there are two paths in which one can live their life. There is the right-hand path where we accept the context of our world, behave in accordance with its rules, and never see the completion of this mythic adventure. And then there is the left-hand path, where we follow our bliss.
Now, there are two kinds of mythology. There's what is called the right-hand path, the mythology of the village compound that keeps you fixed in the context of your world. You grow up here, you live as expected, you live a dignified, successful, and in a rich society, a richly developed life. On the other hand, you may flip out. You may have the feeling of incongruities here, and then you move out. You move out into a realm of danger. This is known as the left-hand path. You follow the way of your own bliss. And you are in a realm for which there are no rules. And since your bliss is not mine, you don't know where you're going. Here you will live a life of danger, creativity, perhaps not a respected life, but certainly an interesting one. And these are the two choices. And there are mythologies for both. There's the right-hand mythology, which is local to each culture. And then there is what I would call the general mythology of the hero journey, the night sea journey, the hero quest, where the individual is going to bring forth in his life something that was never beheld before, namely the fulfillment in time and space of his own potentialities, which are peculiar to himself.